Bostrom doesn't claim we're living in a simulation that matters. What he actually proves is something different, that one of three propositions has to be true. The first, almost every civilization like ours goes extinct before developing the technology needed to simulate ancestors, nuclear war, environmental collapse, and uncontrolled artificial intelligence. Some catastrophe always stops the next step before any civilization reaches what Bostrom calls the post-human stage. The second, civilizations that do get there simply choose not to simulate their ancestors. Maybe for ethical reasons, maybe simulating human suffering is considered morally forbidden, maybe out of disinterest, maybe once a civilization is advanced enough, it just stops caring about its own past. Either way, almost none of them decide to run these simulations at scale. The third, we are almost certainly living inside a simulation right now. Because if any advanced civilization decides to simulate and has the computing power to run thousands, millions of these simulations, the number of simulated minds would be astronomically larger than the number of original minds that ever actually existed. And here's the statistical core of the argument. If you are any conscious mind, picked at random from every mind that has ever existed or will exist, and the vast majority of those minds are simulated, then you probably are too. Bostrom isn't asking you to believe any specific one of the three. He's saying, pick whichever seems most likely to you. There's no comfortable fourth option where none of this matters. And it was exactly that third proposition that left academia and became public debate, thanks to someone most people wouldn't expect. In 2016, at the Code Conference, Elon Musk took Bostrom's argument and simplified it. He said the odds are 1,000,000,000 to 1 that we're living in base reality. His reasoning, video games went from Pong in 1972 to near photorealistic graphics in a few decades. He argued that even if that rate of progress slowed down 1,000 times over something like 10,000 years, nothing on an evolutionary scale, games and reality would become indistinguishable. Musk's quote isn't a formal calculation, it's an informal extrapolation of Bostrom's logic, but it carried the argument to millions of people who had never heard of analytic philosophy. On the academic side, philosopher David Chalmers of New York University went even further. In 2022, he published Reality Plus, a book of more than 500 pages, arguing that even if we are living in a simulation, that wouldn't make our existence any less real. For Chalmers, the mistake is assuming that simulated means fake. If a simulation is computationally rich enough to produce genuine conscious experience, it isn't a second-rate copy of reality. It is a reality, just running on different infrastructure than we assumed. That completely changes the emotional weight of the question. If Chalmers is right, discovering we live in a simulation would be no scarier than discovering the universe is made of atoms instead of classical elements like fire and water. But on the other side of the debate, an astrophysicist at one of the most respected universities in the United States decided to redo Bostrom's math from scratch, and he didn't like what he found. In 2020, astrophysicist David Kipping of Columbia University decided to redo Bostrom's calculation with more statistical rigor using a method called Bayesian inference. Kipping showed that the popular version of the argument, the one claiming it's statistically almost certain that we're in a simulation, overstates the probability by ignoring one important variable: the uncertainty over whether these kinds of simulations are even technically possible. His calculation lands on a very different result, a maximum of 50% chance, half, not near certainty. And there's an interesting twist in Kipping's own work. He found that the moment humanity managed to build its own conscious simulation, the odds would shift dramatically, because that would rule out one of the trilemma's options for good, suddenly making the simulation proposition far more likely. But the strongest argument against the case doesn't come from statistics, it comes from physics. In 1962, a calculation known as the Bremerman limit established a hard ceiling on how much computation any physical system can perform per kilogram of matter. Simulating an entire universe with billions of conscious minds might simply exceed what any physical computer, no matter how advanced, could ever do. And there's more. Simulating interacting quantum particles at the scale of a universe grows exponentially harder to compute. Physicists call this the sign problem. It may be mathematically impossible to simulate realistic quantum physics at any scale, even for a civilization 1,000,000 years from now, with technology we can't even imagine today. But even if a simulation turns out to be physically impossible to prove through pure math, some physicists proposed a way to test it in practice by looking at the sky. Even so, some physicists haven't given up on finding an empirical answer. In 2014, researchers including Zohri Davoudi proposed that if the universe works like a computational grid, the same way our own particle physics simulations work, that structure should subtly distort ultra-high energy cosmic rays. The distribution of those rays would show a subtle break in rotational symmetry, revealing the shape of the underlying grid. It's a real test, scientifically serious, still being carried out today. The strongest limit measured so far says that if this grid exists, it is extremely fine, at energies above 10 to the power of 11 GeV, far beyond anything we can currently detect. Theoretical physicist Brian Greene raises an interesting counterpoint to this kind of cert. According to him, even if detectable glitches existed in the simulation, a civilization advanced enough to simulate an entire universe would probably be able to patch those bugs in real time and rewrite the memory of whoever noticed them. Which means that looking for glitches might be literally pointless if the simulation is good enough to fool us completely. It would also be good enough to fix anything that gave it away. And that leaves us in a strange place, scientifically honest, but philosophically uncomfortable. 22 years after Bostrom's paper, nobody has proven he was right. Nobody has proven he was wrong. Physicists disagree with each other with equal scientific rigor. Philosophers disagree about whether the answer would even matter, even if we found it out. And one of the richest men in the world has publicly decided he believes it's practically certain that none of this is real. Maybe the more interesting question isn't, which of the trilemma's 3 propositions is true? Maybe it's this: what actually changes in practice if you found out the answer tomorrow? If we're living in a simulation, your problems today will still need to be solved today. The people you love will still matter just as much. The pain will still hurt. The joy will still feel real enough to be worth having. Bostrom never said this should change how we live. He only proved that one of the 3 answers has to be true and left us with the task of deciding which one we choose to believe.